So for today's player profile, we're going to be covering Kyle Anderson. Obviously, we acquired him in a sign and trade from the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Klay Thompson 6-team deal. Kyle is a NBA veteran, 31 years old. His birthday was actually this past week. And so I'm excited to see what he can provide for us this season. Obviously, he's the epitome of a system fit, can play our brand of basketball, and he's been around the league. He's played on Memphis, he's played on the Timberwolves, so he's been on some very quality defensive teams, and he's going to provide a lot for us this season. So to start off, last season for the Timberwolves, he played 79 games, and he in those games averaged 22.6 minutes per. So didn't quite play half a game each one. He was kind of a little bit under that, more like a role player off the bench than a starter. But there were times last season where he did start out of necessity due to injuries and various lineup and matchup situations. He shot 46% from the field, 23% from three, 6 points a game, 3.5 rebounds, and 4 assists. So one thing that pops off the stat sheet immediately is his well-roundedness, right? Points, rebounds, assists, he fills up the box score. That's one thing about Kyle that we'll get to know really well as fans is his versatility, and specifically his versatility defensively, because he has positive wingspan, size, and guile. His ability to navigate and use his experience throughout the course of his career to leverage his frame, 6'9", wingspan at 7'3". Him being patient, strong, fundamentally sound. That's something that has been the case since he entered the NBA, since he played for the Spurs. He's capable of, taking on tough matchups, guarding multiple positions. That's something that, he's been doing his entire career. And last season in particular, he always, is embracing that matchup difficulty. He doesn't run away from, the top matchups in the league like Jokic or Anthony Davis. He can guard 4s and 5s. He's capable of that. And so his 7'3" wingspan gives him the length to bother shots in the post, to stick with his man. His ability to understand angles and his craftiness in terms of his defensive prowess, that's something that also remains true. And again, he can guard 1 through 5. He's someone that we've watched in one series guard Nikola Jokic, and then in the next guard Luka Doncic. So Kyle's ability to guard multiple positions in multiple matchups is something that's wildly underrated and wildly valuable, because how many players and how many teams in the league can say that they're able to guard and switch multiple positions? It's a very rare tool and asset players can possess. So again, patience, understanding the fundamentals, playing textbook defense, remaining strong in the post or on the perimeter, snaking the screen, and using his frame and his overall physical tools to make things tough on any given matchup, 1 through 5. He can guard wings, he can guard big guards, he can defend centers as well. Another thing that Kyle will bring to the table next season, he's capable of handling the ball. He's someone that for years now has initiated the offense at a high level as a wing. He's able to make high-level reads and live dribble passes throughout the duration of the game. So one thing I've noticed about Kyle Anderson is his ability to execute in transition. He can see the floor. His court vision is wide, and from corner to corner, he can see cutters, he can see shooters. So Kyle's ability to be efficient with the pass and to be unselfish is something that's very apparent. His assist to turnover ratio at 3.5 is also one of the best in the league for his position at the 4. Kyle Anderson, we're expecting him next season to initiate some offense. He'll have the ball in his hands. You know how Steve likes to, play his front court players at the top of the key with the motion offense in rhythm, in action. And Kyle's going to be searching for cutters. He's going to be looking for shooters. And that's one of his biggest assets and one of his most valuable abilities is his playmaking. So in addition to his versatility as a defender, he can also provide playmaking. And so you see the combination of skill sets. He's such a well-rounded player and someone that really can perform at a high level in various aspects of the game. And last season, as I mentioned earlier, he didn't really play that much. I mean, somewhere in the low 20s per game is that of a bench player, a solid role player who can contribute in pockets and stretches and spurts, but isn't someone that's going to play heavy minutes. However, I do see him being a closing caliber piece because of his skill set. 79 games played also speaks to his durability, right? He's out there, he's reliable, he's someone that doesn't really get injured a lot. Next, his paint scoring value. This is something that stands out with Kyle from the rest of our front court outside of Trace. Draymond and Looney aren't necessarily the greatest of play finishers or paint scorers. They don't necessarily have a floater or a push shot. They don't have a baby hook that they could go to. Kyle Anderson has some skill to his game. He has the ability to attack mismatches on the block, kind of like how Wiggins does. Backing down smaller defenders, attempting push shots and baby hooks. His value off the ball can't be understated. Cutting into open space, finding ways to break zones, right? Setting backdoor screens. Kyle Anderson doesn't waste space or motion on the court. He is someone that's always going to be doing something, whether it's a back screen, whether it's a pin down, whether it's a slip cut, whether it's a baseline cut, playmaking in the short roll. However he fills in, he will be connective, right? He will be connecting lineups. He will be providing the intangibles. These are things that Kyle does really well. He is able to connect the dots, whether it's as a playmaker, a play finisher, or someone that just kind of fills in the gaps. Even if he's not involved in the play, he'll still crash the boards. He'll still put a body on his man. He'll still get back in transition to make sure that the matchups are all lined up. Kyle Anderson's awareness and his attention to detail as an NBA veteran is so critical and valuable because it's comparable to Otto Porter. Otto Porter, one of the most underrated things about him was his ability to actually stay connected throughout the duration of the game with as few mistakes as possible, right? The ability to stay engaged and understand the play calls, understand the sets that are being ran, blowing up those actions, or on the other end, offensively, filling in the gaps, understanding spacing and distance, and seeing the play before it develops. Playmaking throughout the course of the play is huge, right? The connective passing, whether it's seeing the corner man or watching the secondary action unfold. Kyle Anderson is someone that's going to fill in those gaps. So he can attack on the block. He provides off-ball value as a playmaker and as a scorer. And on top of that, he has a lot of tricks in the toolkit. He has a high release point floater where he can get to that, kind of restricted area on the court, that spot where he's throwing those, floaters up over the length of, a 7-foot rim protector. We've seen him, be able to counter some of the better defenders in the league in the paint with those types of shots. So even though Kyle isn't necessarily someone that's going to be pulling up from the mid-range all the time or shooting spot up threes, that's in his bag. Don't get me wrong. He's capable of it. But his bread and butter offensively in terms of scoring is floaters, short-range jumpers, stops and pops, where he's, within that restricted area, within that 6 to 8 foot range, and he's kind of hitting those play finishes that, Looney passes up on. Draymond isn't really capable of knocking down consistently because he doesn't have the touch. Draymond and Looney just simply don't have the touch or the skill to be able to hit those shots and effectively absorb that space and convert and deliver. I think with Kyle, what we've seen is if players like Ja Morant or Anthony Edwards get trapped, Kyle is fully effective and fully competent in the short roll as a playmaker, like I mentioned earlier, but also as a scorer because he has the skill to evade. He has the shiftiness and the craftiness to, create something out of nothing, whether it's against a bigger defender or a smaller defender with more length or, with more speed. He's someone that can counteract because he's very, very shrewd and he understands how to position himself and his body between the basket and his man in order to be effective. Because he's not going to beat you with his athleticism. He's not going to beat you with his, jump shooting and his shot creation. He's going to beat you with his guile and he's going to beat you with his craftiness. And so this is just a part of his arsenal and he's expanding his game further out. Those short range jumpers, by the way, are very underrated. I think that's a part of his game that doesn't get discussed enough about because we see him do so much else, but he can hit those 10 footers, that elbow jump shot, pulling up from 12 feet out. He can hit that nail shot where he's at the free throw line, running his zone, and he fills in that space, knocks it down. He's capable of filling in those gaps, like I said earlier. So ultimately, that is his greatest strength as a scorer. And on top of that, he's become more comfortable in the mid range, pulling up from mid range, whether it's on the left block, middle of the court, or at the elbow. Kyle Anderson's mid range versatility is actually one of the best in the NBA. In fact, last season, he shot 57% in the mid range. And one of the things that the mid range can do is it helps break down his zone. So if teams are running a zone defense and you have shooters around the court or you don't, he's able to fill in that space in the middle and be able to catch and pop those shots if he needs to. And that's a valuable player to have because Looney isn't really capable of that. Draymond, we haven't seen him do that. So to have a player in the front court who is comfortable taking shots of that caliber is invaluable. And it's something we really haven't had since the Sean Livingston. I think one of the most accurate comps you can make of Kyle Anderson's game, feel, play style, and physical attributes is Sean. Because even though he's a little bit taller than Sean, they have this, similar length, and they have the ability to actually play within the flow of the offense. Even though they're not great three-point shooters, they can make plays and they can score, especially in the mid-range. So once again, that's a part of his game that's developing. He's improved at that over the years. Last season in particular, he excelled in the mid-range, but Kyle's greatest scoring strength is in that short roll or where, defenses kind of stay home on shooters and he's able to just hit those skill shots in that restricted area range within that 6 to 8 foot area on the court. And then to continue, this is the first player we've done a breakdown for with 3 slides of strengths. 3 slides of strengths. To continue, again, it speaks to his versatility, his rebounding presence. Kyle has a 7'3" wingspan. When you have a wingspan of that caliber, you can leverage that boxing out. You can play bigger than you actually are, right? And using that, leveraging that to, tap out boards or to corral rebounds in traffic. He can get busy on the glass. That's someone that, he's been really working on over the years, and he has great instincts for crashing the glass. His willingness to put a body on opposing players, box out, apply the intangibles on a possession-to-possession basis. These are the key aspects of ending defensive possessions and being consistent on that end. Because it's one thing to generate a stop. It's another to actually complete it, right? We've seen teams be able to generate multiple stops, but you fail to complete rebounds, and ultimately, you won't get that opportunity to go on the fast break and generate offense. So what we need from Kyle next season is exactly what we've seen Otto Porter do in the past, what we've seen Andre Iguodala do in the past. Being able to play that small ball 4, connecting the lineups, rebounding, putting a body on man, and crashing the glass. Being aggressive and using his physical tools and his hustle to generate boards, end defensive possessions, or extend offensive ones. Another thing that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to expand on this, his unorthodox style of play. Kyle is not your conventional, power forward. He's not someone that's going to stretch the floor necessarily, or he's not someone that's going to score in the post. Kyle, as a power forward, is very unique. He relies mostly on his craftiness. He's very skilled. He's very shifty. Not shifty in the sense of speed, but shifty in the sense of craftiness, right? And he throws defenders off with this ability because he's deliberate, he's methodical. His pace is something that is very difficult for defenders to get used to because he plays at his own speed, he plays at his own rhythm. His rhythm of, the Euro step or the quicksand deceleration, right? He can decelerate. When you have a player that can do that and get into their spots, that's something that's very unique, especially in the front court. We see Luka Doncic do it as a wing. We've seen players like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander do it as a guard, decelerating, getting to their positioning. They play at their own speed, at their own pace. But ultimately, Kyle Anderson's doing it in the front court as a power forward. I mean, how many players can you really name that aren't super athletic or aren't super skilled that are still able to be effective at the 4? Kyle doesn't need a three-point shot. He doesn't need to dunk on defenders and to, impose his athleticism. He's someone that can play at a high level using his guile and his craftiness, throwing his matchup off, being deliberate with his pace, methodical, and understanding how to, Euro step, his timing, his understanding of footwork and positioning. These are the details and the nuances that separate him from other players of his lack of athleticism. Another thing that he provides, veteran leadership, and this is absolutely crucial, right? He's a staple of accountability. We saw in his, time with the Wolves, he's got into a few altercations with teammates. He got into a few, kind of scuffles, but in a good way. It was about holding players accountable, holding everyone accountable, making sure that if you're supposed to do something, if you're supposed to be somewhere on the court, that it happens. That if it doesn't happen, you got to call them out on it, and you got to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself. So Kyle's ability to hold his teammates accountable and to be communicative, to talk, to explain what he was doing, what they should do, and to work through those mistakes is a very, very valuable thing, because there's some players that don't talk at all. There's some players who are very quiet. In fact, Steve Kerr said last season was one of the quietest teams he's ever coached, if not the quietest. So to have a player that's not afraid to be open and honest and communicative when it comes to making mistakes or when it comes to doing the right thing on the court is invaluable. It's another quality that Otto Porter had as well. And while Otto and Kyle are different in terms of, the crux of their skill sets, I think they're very similar in terms of not only the positions they play, but the understanding of the game at the high level, and also their commitment to being a veteran and to doing what is required of them to make sure lineups are connected, that they're executing on a possession-to-possession basis. Those are things that we need to see. Another thing is that he's a respected locker room presence. Adding players who are not 22, 23, 24, but rather 29, 30, 31. He's been in a lot of locker rooms. He's played around a lot of teammates. So he knows what it takes to win. He's been in the playoffs. He has that experience. He knows what's required when you're faced with different personalities, when you're faced with players with different skill sets and different backgrounds and different personalities. He's been around a lot of different types of players. So to have a guy that can come in and understands that, he can fit right in, and his off-court chemistry will be on point. He knows how to, generate team bonding and things of that nature. I think it's invaluable, and it's absolutely essential this coming season that we have veterans like this really bringing the team together on and off the court. Now, some of the weaknesses he has, one of the most glaring is his athletic shortcomings. He doesn't have a lot of explosiveness as an athlete, especially in the NBA. So he doesn't have a lot of vertical pop as a finisher, right? His leaping ability is something that's quite limited. His below average first step and lateral quickness. He's not someone that's going to blow by a defender. He's not going to beat him off the dribble or off the bounce and get to the basket or create a lot of separation in space to get to his look. Kyle is someone, like I said earlier, he's going to be crafty. He's going to be, very, very calculated and deliberate with his pace and with his, movements on the court, on and off the ball. And so he doesn't have a lot of, first step burst. And he does need some more muscle as well to guard in the post. One thing that I did notice, while he was capable of guarding some centers and he was thrown onto Jokic as well at times, I still think I noticed some breakdowns at moments with Kyle at the 5, because he just doesn't have enough muscle mass to, each and every possession guard a Nikola Jokic. And very few players do, if any, right? So even beyond the elite bigs, I think there's certain matchups that are more favorable to Kyle, and they lend themselves to an easier time for Kyle to have. There are other matchups that he might struggle with, right? He's had some success with Anthony Davis. If you look at their matchup stats, they tend to favor Kyle Anderson. But part of why that is because Anthony Davis isn't someone that's going to necessarily bully you every possession. He may settle for a little push shot or a hook shot or a mid-range jumper. And I think, when you're playing more of the bruisers and the physical forces in the NBA, like a Joel Embiid or a Jokic or a Cat, someone that's going to back you down in the post and, use their 260, 270-pound frame to try to bully ball you, I think that's something Kyle may not always be equipped to guard. However, you can live with him guarding Giannis for 4 possessions, right? It's not like it's a complete and total mismatch either. So I want to make that clear. Another thing that Kyle struggles with is he can't make defenses pay regularly when he's left open. He's not a respectable three-point threat. He's not someone that's going to be, knocking down open shots like Otto Porter did, or even JaMychal for that matter. He's just not someone that is a high-level shooter from the perimeter. His scoring mostly comes from inside the arc and, quite honestly, inside the paint. Not even really in the mid-range, even though he was a really good mid-range shooter last year. He shot 57.6% in the mid-range, which is incredible. He only took 33 of them. You do the math on that. 33 mid-range shots in 79 games. Quick math will tell you that's less than half a mid-range shot per game. That means every 3 games he took 1 mid-range shot. So when you really look at the numbers, the volume of those mid-range shots just quite isn't high enough for Kyle. However, his three-point shot is something that he's been working on this offseason. We've gone through the footage. We've looked at the film and the video of Kyle working on his mechanics, reworking his form from the ground up, understanding how to redevelop his touch, and putting himself in a position where he can train, work hard, and redefine what he is as a basketball player, reinvent himself. He understands that he has a weakness, looks in the mirror, and gets to work. And that's a very, very admirable quality to have as a player, especially for a player that just signed a 3-year deal. Most players sign a 3-year deal and they're popping champagne and they're celebrating and they're buying a new house and a new car. Kyle Anderson said, I got to get to work. I got to work on my jumper. And he got right in the gym and he was working on his reps with a shooting coach and a trainer. And I expect his shot to be improved next year for that reason. His work ethic is unmatched. It's something that, he's over time, over the years, added something to his game every season. He's always gotten a little bit better. And so even though our last memory of Kyle Anderson last year was a 23% three-point shooter, someone that, who's reluctant to shoot. At times, he passed up open shots like Draymond last season. He was scared to attempt shots because he knew how inefficient he was, how unorthodox his form is, how slow his release is. And it did cause spacing issues for the Timberwolves. It was something that actually affected their offense. An already struggling offense, an already handicapped offensive team with Kyle Anderson in there, of course it's going to exacerbate and amplify those limitations and those struggles. And so that's exactly what happened. And what people have to realize is he's working on it. So next season, my expectation isn't that he's going to struggle again from 3. I think he's going to be an improved shooter for good this time. I think he's going to be someone that, this offseason, that release looks smoother. It looks more fluid. It looks like he's been working on it. And we've seen the open runs as well. In the open runs, he looks very comfortable getting to his release point, his shot pocket, and having one fluid motion rather than kind of a mechanical looking hitch to his shot. And so it's a good thing that he addressed this and that he's working on it. Even though last season, our latest memory of Kyle is that he's not a great three-point shooter. He also struggles in one-on-one situations. And that's obvious. He's not someone, like I've said before, who's going to break you down with his handle, with his, craftiness off the bounce, getting to spots. He's not a wing that's going to score like a Kevin Durant or a Jason Tatum. That's just not his ability, right? Even on a smaller scale, he's not someone like a Jonathan Kuminga who has the ability to get to a spot and pull up. Kyle is not blowing by defenders. He's not going to explode past defenders. He's someone that's going to move the ball east to west. He's someone that's going to cut down the middle north to south. That's what he does. He plays the dunker spot. He connects lineups. He fills in the gaps. And at times, he can occasionally hit a jumper. He can, knock down a pull-up or a floater or a baby hook against a mismatch. Or he can hit a corner 3, right? He can do these things in spots and pockets. But it's not something we're going to rely on him to do because that's not his greatest attribute. His greatest attribute is his well-roundedness, his all-around game, the totality of what he provides. And again, one thing in particular, right? Like I said, Jonathan Kuminga can put the ball on the floor and blow by defenders. slower defenders, weaker defenders. He can exploit a lack of athleticism. Because Kyle is inherently unathletic, he is incapable of exploiting other unathletic matchups and defenders. So that is why we can't expect him to, explode past maybe even a Brook Lopez. Because as slow-footed as Brook Lopez might be, Kyle Anderson isn't much more athletic than him, right? Again, Brook Lopez 7-footer, Kyle Anderson 6'9", but neither are going to be quick on their feet. Another thing that we've seen throughout the years, he is a little bit turnover prone. Even though he did post one of the best assist to turnover ratios last season, Kyle tends to be more turnover prone at times. You'll see him on the fast break sometimes throw an errant pass or be a little bit, urgent to get the ball up the court. Have that sense of, moving the ball and trying to make a play. And sometimes it results
like
in a
Draymond.
turnover. Yeah, like Draymond, exactly. And so he's similar to Draymond in a lot of ways, actually, in terms of his skill set, in terms of his limitations, in terms of his play style, and his overall ability. But I do think he fills in some gaps that Draymond doesn't. And I will say he did have a better assist to turnover ratio than LeBron last season. I'm not saying he's a better playmaker than LeBron. I'm not saying he's better at taking care of the ball than LeBron. What I'm saying is he's clearly a very good front court playmaker, and that's something that we have to look forward to next season. But it does come with some turnovers here and there. Expectations. Now, this is the best part. What do we think of Kyle next season? Well, I expect him to come off the bench. I don't see him as a starter. He's going to be a consistent bench player. He's going to play his role. He's going to have, anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes at power forward a game, which we'll get into the projection right after this. But he's going to be playing at the 4. I mean, now, I did mention his positional versatility, and we're going to get into that. One of the things that we expect of Kyle next season is, again, him being a Swiss Army knife. That's what he does best. He doesn't do one thing incredibly well. He's not a specialist. He's a player that does everything well. He's well-rounded. So him being a Swiss Army knife, that ties into the fact that he'll be positionally versatile, right? A multi-positional defender, someone that can be a point forward, that can defend wings, that can also be a small ball big. He can play the 5, and I expect him to next season. I expect Kyle Anderson to get infrequent but occasional minutes at the 5 against certain matchups, right? Against select matchups, he can see a 5-minute stretch or even a 10-minute stretch at the 5. In fact, we saw him do that with the Timberwolves the last couple of years. He's played more and more as a 4-5 than a 3-4. And so, yeah, one thing I do expect next season, he'll play some small ball 5 for Steve Kerr. And trust me when I tell you, he is a worlds apart, orders of magnitude better center than Dario Saric was. From a defensive standpoint, and I would even argue offensively, because while Dario can shoot the ball, when that shot isn't falling, he doesn't provide any other value. With Kyle Anderson, he doesn't rely on his shot. He's a connector. He's someone that's going to, make plays. He averages far more assists than Dario ever did. And he can score and finish it at the rim. And he's, crafty. He has a mid-range shot. Kyle's a better offensive player than he gets credit for, in fact. But again, point forward. He's going to initiate the offense. He will be having the ball in his hands. He has ball handling skills, right? He can make plays, read the offense in the read and react. He can understand the system and, look for cutters, look for shooters who are freeing up. These are things that I expect of Kyle next season as a point forward. Defending wings, right? We saw him guard Luka Doncic last series in the conference finals last year. We saw Kyle guard all types of players in different matchups. We've seen him guard Kevin Durant, right? We've seen him guard Devin Booker, right? So he's going to be guarding wings as well. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, small ball big, spot minutes. And to tie it in with his positional versatility on the defensive end, he will also have a lot of impactful rebounding ability. Tap outs, closing defensive possessions, even offensive rebounds. Kyle Anderson's a very good rebounder for his size. At 6'9", 7'3" wingspan, he can really inhale a lot of rebounds. So I expect that to happen. He's a system fit, like I mentioned earlier. Connective traits, someone that's going to be a trigger man, read and react offense, play within the motion system, within the flow, understanding how to find guys for back cuts at the top of the key, looking for shooters and DHOs, different actions, even in the mid post or high post, looking for other secondary actions. Kyle is very capable of reading the floor, and his court vision is very expansive. So he will be making plays, and he's a ideal system fit. I would even argue he's better as a rebounder, as a passer, playmaker, and inside scorer than Otto. While Otto, I would give him the edge as a shooter, I'd give Kyle the edge as a defender, rebounder, and playmaker. Another thing I mentioned earlier, his short roll playmaking. If Kyle Anderson is in the short roll with Steph Curry getting trapped, or Buddy Hield coming off of a screen, I think he's more than capable. We saw it last season on the Timberwolves to make that read, whether it's a lob in the dunker spot for Trace or whether it's a shooter in the corner like a Melton or Potts. Kyle Anderson's ability to read the floor at a high level and understand what his position is on the court in the short roll, scanning the 48 feet offensively, or rather 47 feet, scanning the 47 feet of space he has offensively and understanding what to look for and where to pinpoint his passes. And he's capable of throwing a lob. He's capable of kicking out to a shooter, throwing a skip pass. These are things that he's comfortable doing. We've seen it in Minnesota, right? We've seen him set down screens and DHOs and throw lobs to Rudy Gobert, big to big actions. We've seen him kick out to shooters like Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, his drive and kick ability. So he's a very versatile playmaker, and in the short roll, he will be invaluable. In fact, he's a better scorer than Draymond in the short roll. He's a better scorer than Kevon Looney in the short roll. So one thing he not only does in the short roll is playmake, but score as well at a high level. And so these are things that I'm going to look for next season. He's an infinitely better playmaker than Otto, I think, because we've seen him have the ball in his hands and actually make plays. While Otto was a good initiator at times, I think Kyle Anderson is not just an initiator, he's a full-on playmaker, especially in transition. Lastly, like I mentioned, his veteran presence. Formulating a winning culture. You cannot win a championship without veterans. Veterans are an essential mainstay. They're a pillar of every championship team, role players or stars. You can't name a championship that hasn't been won without vets. It takes experience to win. It takes postseason experience to win, right? Understanding matchups and schemes and strategy at a high level, having the experience in the playoffs of switching schemes on the fly, understanding adjustments, where you went wrong, how to correct that, and an overall winning culture, an overall winning environment, an atmosphere of empowerment and getting guys to their spots. Kyle is someone that's going to put Pods in the right position. He's going to put Trace in the right position. Jonathan Kuminga in the right spots. He understands how to empower his teammates, even though, yes, he's had, his moments. It's a good thing. It's better to confront the issue than sweep it under the rug. And that's something he did with Rudy Gobert last year. Rudy Gobert and him, or 2 years ago rather, in the playing game. Rudy Gobert and him almost came to blows. But it's a good thing sometimes. As long as you're not actually going to blows, you're not throwing that punch like Draymond did to Jordan, and you're actually talking it out and you're having a dialogue, this is what you want to see from a veteran. Because Kyle is not someone that's going to be quiet. He's not going to be passive and allow things to just happen. He's going to call it out and he's going to be aggressive and active in his role and in his responsibility as a veteran. Veterans have responsibilities beyond just showing up. They have to build off-court chemistry. They have to make sure everyone's on the same page. They have to invest in the youth. And if you're doing that, then you're doing your job. And Kyle has done that. He's empowered his teammates. So, again, he's been to the playoffs. We watched him. Actually, he performed really well against us in 2022. He had a 17-point game in Game 4, in fact. With Warriors-Grizzlies Game 4 in 2022, he performed really well. So he's had really solid moments in games throughout the duration of his postseason career where he can point to. And Again, he understands the playoff atmosphere, what's demanded of it. He played under Popovich, the Spurs. He knows what winning is all about, what it takes, the ingredients. And that's invaluable. Like I said, Otto Porter, GP2, Bielitsa, Andre Iguodala. Those were the 4 veterans we signed in 2022. They all had that familiarity with winning and understanding how to be connective. And we had young players on that team as well. So that's what it is required of a veteran. You have to invest in who's around you. Now, just to tie this all together, I think the biggest takeaway for Kyle, the biggest thing I will say to you guys, expect him to be on the court. Expect him to be a Steve Kerr favorite and a staple of the rotation. He will be one of the first guys off the bench next year. My player projection for Kyle Anderson, I have him playing around 23.7 minutes per game, around 23 to 25, give or take. Points per game, I have at around 8.2. Rebounds, 5.1. Assists, 4.6. Steals at 1 full. Blocks, 0.7. And I have Kyle shooting 49% from the field, 34.6% from 3, 72 at the line, and a plus minus of plus 136. Last season for the Timberwolves, he was a little bit higher than that. I think he was around a plus 160. The reason I don't have him at around that is because I just don't know if we'll be as good as the Wolves were last year. The Wolves were the number 3 seed. So to be a 3 seed, it means that you have to play around high-level players. And so we'll see who Steve pairs Kyle next to. I still think Kyle's going to be a massive positive. And you notice that I have his three-point shot in the mid-30s. I expect it to improve mightily, significantly, drastically, emphatically, over 10% of improvement for Kyle from the three-point shot next year. I expect that to happen. And from the field, he's going to float around 50%. He's a very efficient player. He doesn't take ill-advised shots. He's not a high-volume scorer either. So he'll fill in the gaps. He'll be active. And his production, I expect it to be better than last year. Last season, he only averaged 6.4 points, 3.5 rebounds, 4 assists, right? I expect his points, rebounds, and assists to go up, and ultimately his minutes to go up. So one more point I want to mention too. Look out for a Kyle Buddy Hield connection. Look out for unique chemistry between Kyle Anderson and Buddy Hield, just as we saw with Clay and Trace, just as we've seen with Steph and Draymond. Look out for Kyle and Buddy because they can follow the same routes, patterns, and details, the nuances of understanding each other because Kyle's skill set is very similar to that of Draymond. It's very similar to the point forward, DHO, screen setting, slipping, making reads type of player offensively. And then defensively, we know his versatility, right? And then Buddy Hield is similar to Klay Thompson in terms of the fact that, and Steph Curry. He plays off the ball. He's a movement shooter. He's going to always be in motion, and he's looking to take shots. And he's very efficient at that. He's one of the elite shooters in the league. So Kyle and Buddy, to me, will be one of the best front court, back court pairings we'll see on this roster. That 2-man game, if Steve Kerr really leans into it, can be one of the most effective we've seen in a long time. Obviously, Steph and Draymond is unmatched, but this could rival potentially Trace and Clay. This Kyle and Buddy potential chemistry that I think that they're going to most likely build because their skill sets complement each other like a puzzle piece. Their skill sets complement each other at a very high level. And that is kind of my overall take on Kyle Anderson. What's up, Bubba? How we doing, bro? I'm excited, man. I'm doing well. I think, this Kyle Anderson breakdown, I think we did a good job of addressing everything. The expectations should be high. He's going to be a veteran. He's making $27 million over 3 years. So they've invested in him. This is beyond just a 1-year rental. This isn't a mid-level contract. This is a guy that's going to be on this roster for a few seasons. So expect him because they're going to invest in a system fit. They're going to invest in someone that understands the offense at a high level, that can defend multiple positions, and most importantly, is in their prime. Kyle Anderson is in his prime. You need players of that caliber. You cannot have players that are way too young or way too old. He just turned 31 5 or 6 days ago. Kyle turned 31 5 days ago. So he's still a young vet. He's a young vet, and he's going to still improve because his jumper needs some work. He got in the gym this offseason, worked at it. He's going to improve. Also, think about it this way as well. There hasn't been a team Kyle Anderson has played on that is more catered to and is more built for his skill set than the Warriors. The Warriors are the most tailored team to what Kyle does best. And so I expect him to fit right in and to be a seamless transition, a very limited, if any, adjustment period for Kyle Anderson next year. And I'm so excited that we traded for him and we brought him in because he's been on my radar for a long time. Kyle Anderson's a player that I've been wanting on this team since 2 seasons ago. Multiple seasons ago, I've been asking to add him to the roster. And I'm very, very glad that they finally did because, his nickname is Slow-Mo. And he, obviously there's some noise about his athleticism and his shot. And he's a little bit of a funky player. But ultimately, he's a positive. He does good things on the court. And one thing you can't deny is he buys in. He's a player that's always going to be, a positive in one way or another, whether it's rebounding, defense, scoring. He always fits in one way or another. So I'm very glad Mike Dunleavy traded for him. That was the right move. And, that was the breakdown right there for Kyle.